Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're gonna be talking about microbiology, specifically microorganisms and viruses. So what are microbes? From the name microbes, that means they are microorganisms. That means we need a microscope to see them, okay? So microbes are microscopic organisms that are found in all kingdoms of life. Now this is a misconception. Many people think that, for example, most bacteria are harmful. However, it is actually the opposite. Most bacteria is beneficial to us. There's only a small proportion of them that are harmful and that cause disease, and we'll be looking at them later on in the video. And finally, microbiology basically combines all of these different factors. So it's the study of these microorganisms in their environment, their physiology, their metabolic reactions, their role in the environment, and also how we can use them in biotechnology. So general characteristics of bacteria. Remember we said bacteria are small single-celled prokaryotic organisms. They lack a nucleus, their chromosome is circular, and they do not have any membrane-bound organelles. That means they do not contain Golgi body, they do not contain chloroplast, they do not contain mitochondria. Okay, so all of their reactions occur in the cytosol or the cytoplasm. And they also have a cell wall. However, remember their cell wall is not made up of cellulose like in plants, and they have genetic material, while some might have a flagella in order to move. So this is just a small figure to show you the bacterial structure. As you guys can see, the chromosome is lying freely in the cytoplasm. It's not enclosed in a nucleus, such as in eukaryotic organisms. And you guys can see the cell wall. Some even have a capsule for protection, and also some have plasmid DNA. Now we can even differentiate bacteria into three different shapes. They can either be spherical, rod-shaped, or helical. So the spherical shape, we call them cocci, okay? And these cocci can either be found in a chain, or sometimes they form clusters like a grape-like structure. Moving on to the rod-shaped, which we also call them bacillus or bacilli. These are rod-shaped. And finally, we have the spiral-shaped, which we can also call them helical-shaped. Now, how do bacteria respire? So bacteria can be split into also different groups. We can split them into aerobic bacteria, anaerobic bacteria, and obligate anaerobes and facultative anaerobes. So from the name aerobic bacteria, that means they require oxygen to perform respiration. Now anaerobic, they can survive without oxygen. Now we can split anaerobic into two different groups, obligate anaerobes and facultative anaerobes. Obligate anaerobes, from the word obligate, that means they must live in an environment free of oxygen. If there's oxygen in that environment, they will die. However, facultative, that means they can alternate. So, for example, if they're in an environment and there is oxygen, they can use the oxygen for respiration. However, if oxygen is not available, they can still perform respiration without oxygen. That's what we call facultative anaerobic. Moving on to the reproduction. So how do bacteria reproduce? Bacteria reproduce through a process which we call binary fission. It's an asexual reproduction, so that means we only need one parent, and the daughter cells are going to be completely identical to the parent cell, as we only have one parent which is involved. And this is just a summary. As you guys can see, you have the circular DNA, it's going to split and it's going to replicate, and then we're going to have division in the middle, and we're going to have two identical daughter cells. Now, bacteria, for them to grow, there are different factors that can affect the rate of growth. What are these factors? Of course, bacteria, what do they need to grow? They need nutrients. These nutrients, sugar, salts, and water. Even they need an optimum temperature. Also, they need an optimum pH. So some bacteria cannot live at high temperatures. That's why, for example, if we get chicken, you guys have heard of salmonella, which is a bacteria. They tell you cook your chicken well, no bacteria will survive, because at high temperatures, bacteria will not be able to survive. Okay? Now, usually bacteria have this mechanism. If they feel that the environment is harsh, so for example, there is a lack of nutrients in their environment, they sense their nutrients are becoming low, or they sense the temperature is increasing a lot, or the temperature is decreasing a lot, or they even sense a pH change. So what do? They form spores. We call these spores endospores. Okay? So what is a spore? A spore is basically a dormant, tough structure that is highly resistant to chemical and physical stresses. Okay? So as we said, if a bacteria feels it's going into a dark phase, so it's going to have no nutrients, temperature is going to be bad, the bacteria doesn't want to die. So what it does, it converts itself into a spore, and this spore is going to be highly resistant to these stressors. However, there's something important you have to know, that bacterial spores are not reproductive units. Remember, bacteria reproduce through binary fission. Their spores are not reproductive units. Their spores are just in order to survive harsh environments. Now moving on to their nutrition. So bacteria have a wide variety. They can either be autotrophic or heterotrophic. Remember, autotrophic means they make their own food. Now we can split that into two, photoautotrophs and chemoautotrophs. From the name photo, that means they use light, okay? While chemoautotrophs, that means they use chemicals, okay? Or we can call it chemosynthesis because we use chemicals to make their food. When we talk about heterotrophic, they cannot synthesize their own food. They have to feed on other organisms. And we can also split that into two. Saprophytic, remember, we talked about saprophytic and fungi, which we can also say decomposers. So they obtain nutrients by decomposing organic matter from dead organisms. Or they can be parasitic, where they live inside another host and they feed on the host's nutrients. And of course, these usually cause harm. Okay, as we mentioned, most bacteria are beneficial. So they are decomposers, they help plants in nitrogen fixation. We use them in industries to produce yogurt and cheese. Now, only a small proportion of them are harmful, and we call these pathogenic bacteria. Now, why are these harmful? Because they release toxins, and these toxins are what cause, for example, inflammation in our body, and they cause disease. Moving on to viruses. Now, there's one major thing you have to know about viruses, is that viruses are not living organisms. They are non-living. The reason is that because they cannot replicate unless they are inside a host. And now we'll be looking at that. So viruses in general, what do they contain? They have nucleic acid, which is either DNA or RNA, and it's wrapped in a protein coat, which we also call a capsid. They lack a nucleus, they lack cytoplasm, and they lack other cell organelles. They do not feed, respire, or excrete or grow. And remember, these characteristics were characteristics we spoke about when we differentiated between living organisms and non-living organisms. And finally, they also require a host cell to replicate. These are just examples of different viruses. As you guys can see, it's just protein and a nucleic acid. Now, how do they reproduce? As we said, they need the host in order to be able to reproduce. So as you guys can see, first they attach to a host cell, then they enter the host cell, and inside the host cell, they use the machinery of the host cell for their benefit. So they use it for their benefit to replicate and assemble, and then this will cause the death of the cell, and they will be released, and they will again infect another cell, and so on. Now let's talk about fungi. Fungi, we spoke about them already. They are eukaryotic heterotrophs. They lack chloroplast, and they have cell walls made of chitin. Now, an important thing is how fungi replicate or divide. So, multicellular fungi, remember we said they can either be multicellular or unicellular. Multicellular, they have a mass of interwoven branching filaments, which we call mycelium, and each filament in the mycelium we call a hypha. Now, their nutrition, they can either be parasitic or decomposers. Another word for decomposers is saprophytic. And parasitic, we already said they harm the hosts. And we said the hyphae of fungi are also involved in the breakdown and absorption of food. Now, how do they reproduce? So they can either reproduce asexually or sexually. Asexually is by producing spores. So the fungal spores are responsible for reproduction, so they are a reproductive unit. However, bacterial spores are just a dormant stage in order to survive the harsh conditions. And sexual reproduction is basically the fusion of hyphae from two fungi. Now, back to protists. Remember, we talked about protists that it's a kingdom by itself because we cannot group it under animal or under plant or under fungi. But we can split the protists into three different groups. We can split them into plant-like, animal-like, and fungi-like. So plant-like, they perform photosynthesis, they have chlorophyll, and they store food as storage. However, they are unicellular, but some might be multicellular, and they also, algae, contribute to oxygen production and carbon storage, and they reproduce asexually, using either binary fission or spores, or sexually in unfavorable conditions. Now we have animal-like. The animal-like, we can split them into four based on how they move. Okay? So if it's ciliated, of course they're going to move using the cilia. If it's flagellated, using the flagella, and so on. Okay? So animal-like, we split them based on how they move. And now finally, the fungi-like, they resemble fungi, that's why we call them fungi-like, and they decompose organic matter. We can split them into two, water mold and slime molds. The water molds, of course, will decompose in aquatic environments. However, slime molds, they live on decaying plant matter and they lack cell walls. That's why they differ from fungi. That's why we said we cannot completely group them under one specific kingdom because they share some characteristics. However, other characteristics they do not have. And they also reproduce both sexually and asexually. Finally, how organisms can be transmitted. They can either be transmitted airborne, so basically through air, or direct contact. Sometimes it could be from ingesting contaminated food and water. We said salmonella from food and cholera from water. And also it could be biological vectors such as mosquitoes. They can transmit malaria to us. And that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. Thank you for watching and see you soon.